Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. I appreciate it very much. I think that you can probably already begin to see some of what I'm going to say today, because as you introduced me, it became obvious that project management is my area of expertise. I will tell you now before we start that it didn't start out that way. I'm trained as a mechanical engineer and started in the engineering business, but early on in my career, I made a decision that I didn't want to work for a company for a long time. I knew I had to work for a company for some time. And so I made a decision very early on to eventually be in a consulting role where I controlled my own destiny, where I could be rewarded for the amount of work that I did, or I could be punished for the amount of work that I didn't do. So I'm gonna walk you from the beginning to the end. I'm gonna talk about things that I did that allowed me to establish a consulting firm that's somewhat recognized throughout the world. So listen up to what I'm saying. Now, again, I'm talking about it from a perspective of a United States sort of an application, but now my role is global. I'm all over the world with the same role. But in the beginning, I had to be very careful about doing what was right for my particular residence, which happened to be at the United States. So I got out of school and I went to work for a company that had really nothing to do with my background and experience. It was a construction firm that built double wall storage tanks. So it wasn't really what you'd call an exciting job by any means. And so I did that for a year, made it pretty clear to me that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So I took a job with the National Laboratory developing nuclear bomb material, uh, stand-up equipment that would go downhole for testing. Back in those days, when I was doing it, we were still doing downhole nuclear testing. And so I was designing apparatus that would be put into the hole before the explosion or the implosion of the nuclear device. I liked that. I enjoyed that. I got to do travel. I got to do experimentation. I got to supervise over installation at the Nevada test site for nuclear explosions. But my wife reminded me early on that that's a one mistake job. If you get blown up, then you don't get a second chance. And so I went from that to General Electric, where I started to work with engineers on nuclear technology relative to developing isotopes for medical diagnostics and medical use. And it was then that I began to realize that engineering wasn't really what I wanted to do in the long term. It was good for generating money. I made good money, but I wasn't enjoying myself. And I think one of the things in the introduction I pointed out is you gotta have fun doing what you do. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, an 8-hour day seems like it's 12 hours. So it takes longer every day when you're doing something you don't enjoy. And so I transferred to another division of General Electric because they needed a volunteer to do training on a earned value management system. Now, for those of you that may not know, that's a system that's very well recognized in the U.S. government. It's a very complex system, but it reads out very, very accurate information about statusing of projects. And GE at that time was working on a $300 million a year nuclear power plant project. And they were asked to implement earned value, and they had no idea how to do that. So I volunteered to take on a role of training 300 engineers how to utilize earned value management systems. And from that opportunity, I began to realize management, and in that case specifically training management, was where I wanted to be. And so I did that for about 3 years and loved every minute of it. I couldn't wait to get into work. I wanted to stay as long as I needed to, and it became fun. I began to enjoy what I was doing. So I left GE, though. I was stolen away by an operation up in Richland, Washington. And when I got up there, they said, we not only want you to train our people in how to use project management, we want you to develop management systems to implement within our organization. Now, this was a laboratory environment that was funded by the U.S. government, and we had a lot of money to spend on good, fun, enjoyable things like management systems. And so I had an amazing amount of freedom to do that. And so I did that, and we implemented an earned value system that was validated by the U.S. government in 1981. Well, in the same time in 1981, I was moved to Columbus, Ohio, where I am right now, as a matter of fact, speaking to you. In 1981, I came here to implement project management in a very large project management division. And in doing that, I was approached by the Project Management Institute, which I had joined in 1981, or 1978, just 3 years prior. They addressed my president of my organization and asked if they could borrow me to participate in the creation of a certification program called Project Management Professional. And I was to be one of 5 people that would develop and implement that process. So by 1984, we had gone through that process. We had developed and created a very reasonably well-recognized certification program. And in 1984, in October of 1984, we rolled that out for international consumption. And our first training group that was going to take the exam was 55 in number, only 55, 39 of which passed the exam and were later come on to be the first certified PMPs, which now we have 1.3 million. So I'm sure some of you have your PMP, and be proud of that, because that's a designation that brings with it some instant credibility. Okay, so kind of, but in 84, I was sort of becoming what I wanted to be. Now I need to go back and tell you how I prepared for that, because you don't just say you're going to be a consultant and all of a sudden you are one. You have to plan for that. So by the time I was about 22 years old, I decided that I wanted to be independent, and to be independent in my field, that meant to be a consultant. So I began to build my contact list. One of the most important things in entering into a consulting role is to have an amazing number of contacts, people that you can reach out to when you need work, reach out to when you want to recruit people for work. And so by the time I was 22, I had a contact list of about 23,000 people. Now, this was all built up during my working responsibilities. So during the time I'm working at the laboratory, during the time I'm working at General Electric, I'm recording and keeping a record of all the people that I came in contact with, all the people that I did work for, especially those that were happy with the work that I did. And that became my future marketing list. Now, this was still way too young. I didn't become a consultant until I was almost 30 years old. And so by the time I was 30 years old, my contact list numbered in about 50,000. So now when I decided to go out as a consultant, which happened to be in 1984, after the PMP was implemented, I could immediately contact up to 50,000 people and let them know that I had made a transition from individual contributor in an organizational environment into an independent consultant. Now, by then, based on the fact that I regularly attempted to write for publications, for technical journals, for anything that would accept my inputs in terms of demonstrating my knowledge as an engineer, as an engineering designer, and how it's applied in the real world, I wrote article after article after article, and many of them were and two of the people have retired. And so now I am the last standing original member of the PMP group. So I get all the attention as being one of the primary contributors, one of the primary developers. And when you have 1.3 million people that hold that particular credential, that gives you instant credibility. And so that's given me a lot of background. What you have to make sure is you have the background that qualifies you to be an independent consultant. Now, here's of it, because at the time, this was a struggle for me, because when you go into the consulting business, here's what they tell you. You should have a minimum of 6 months to a year of money put away to cover you in the event that you don't get any jobs. You don't get any revenue coming in for the first 3 to 6 to 9 months, and you have to have enough to survive. If you don't, then you find yourself surrendering your consulting role back into the employment market. So you've got to set aside enough capital to support your consulting role for at least 6 months, and some say up to a year. Now, here's the problem. I went into consulting with no money in the bank. I went into consulting with 1 month's pay from my employer, and therefore I had to earn it. So I reached out to my contacts, offered a discounted rate to get their immediate sign up for needing my support, and also created payment schemes that allowed them to pay me rather quickly. In today's consulting world, one of the other things you got to worry about is time that goes from when you invoice your customer to the time that you actually get paid. And depending on where you are and what country, that can be a very long time. In the US, it started out as 30 days net. So 30 days after you invoice, you expected you would get paid. That grew to 60 days net. And now many organizations are paying on a 90-day net scheme. So that means if work, it's 90 days later before I see the revenue generated from that consulting work. So now you begin to see why you have to have that little nest egg put aside to support you during that process. Because in my case, I had a family and 3 children, house payments, and all the things that go along with it. And so 1 or 2 months without pay, and I'm in trouble. So you've got to think about that head on. Now, some people got consultant support by teaming up with other people who wanted to be in the consulting business, creating partnerships where the other partner bought into the partnership. So that put aside some revenue and some money. But you need to look at, how am I going to pay the bills in the time frame between when I do the work, when I invoice the customer, and when I actually see the invoice paid. One of the big reasons we see a tremendous amount of bankruptcies in the independent consulting business in the United States is this very issue. The failure to recognize, to have enough money put aside that you could survive until your revenue stream starts to build up. So keep that in mind, depending on what kind of consulting you want to go into. This is a very big issue that has to be paid attention to. So we want to look at that from that perspective. So in when I went out in my own. Now, I went out on my own in August of 1984. I didn't have any revenue coming in until November of 1984, but I did have a couple of clients that paid in a fairly timely way that I was able to get by. And so by then, I started to have it come in regularly. Now, you also have to plan your schedule, your calendar as a consultant, to recognize that during the holiday time, you're not working. You're not doing anything but taking up time. So you've got to build your revenue stream around that. Now, here in the Middle East, I did a lot of work in Kuwait. Kuwait was one of my big clients from 86 to 96. I spent a tremendous amount of time in Kuwait working for the Emir himself. I loved Kuwait. But one of the things I did find is that they had lots of holidays. They had difficulty in getting pay out in a timely way. And so even though the work was fantastic, I loved the people, it made it very, very difficult for me. And so I found out the hard way that you have to get an advance agreement on those payment schedules. And by the way, that doesn't mean that's when you'll get paid. That's just what the contract says. So in the U.S., at least, that doesn't necessarily mean you get paid then. So as a consultant, you have to understand that. You also have to make sure that you've associated with something that gives you some indication of credibility. So in my case, I joined the PMI organization, the Project Management Institute organization, in 1978. They had only been in existence 9 years, and nobody really even knew who they were. But I knew project management was going to be my field. So I joined that organization in 78. I'm still a member 44 years later. But out of that membership, I focused my attention on what can I do to draw attention to the organization and therefore draw attention to myself as someone who is knowledgeable in the area of project management, active in participation of a professional association. And so that really carried a lot of weight as I moved through the process. Even when I was still working for organizations up through 84, I was getting large benefits out of being a PMI member in good standing, bringing those kinds of programs into the private sector and letting them understand what the benefits of project management are. I had the joy of being in the project management forum recently there in Saudi Arabia under the sponsorship of the Kuwait's membership committee and out of their particular PMI chapter, and was able to see that project management is a big issue in Saudi. And so in that case, we begin to see that many of you may already have a, quote, leg up if you decide that you want to do consulting. Now, remember, one of the things you give up with consulting is stability, because it's a consultant's life is a tough one. It's up and it's down. And you have some months you got more work than you know what to do with. And then you got some months that you don't have anything going on, and that's when you do your marketing. So you've got to realize that making the decision to be a consultant, while it sounds great, I mean, I'll be honest with you, there was 1 year when I made over $1 million. Now that's probably not a lot of money to you guys, but it's a lot of money to me, and it was because everything I did that year turned into revenue. So when I decided, track the marketplace, track the profession and see what's hot, if you will, okay? So by 1988, 89, the PMP had grown by leaps and bounds, and we had the endorsement of the IBMs and the AT&Ts and the Sprints and the Motorola's. All the big corporations in the United States had embraced the PMP as their method of certifying project managers in their organization. So all of a sudden, these massive sponsorships began to pay big dividends. Well, as a consultant, you got to anticipate the marketplace. So I did that. I anticipate the marketplace. And what I could see coming was lots and lots of people needing education and training to get their PMP, to prepare them for passing the PMP exam, and therefore that very made it a product called PDUs for pennies. In other words, what I was trying to communicate was that they were going to be getting the professional development units, PDUs, but they're going to be getting them for a lot less money than they would pay other firms for delivering the same thing. And of course, tied my reputation as one of the founders as one of the key marketing pieces. Well, in the next 5 years, the demand for PMP training was overwhelming. My average class size was 60 to 80 people at $300 to $400 a person. And pretty soon, the money was flowing in faster than I could count it. And so we had hit the gold mine of training. And it stayed that way until the early 90s. And then there became so much competition because everybody sees this. And you got to remember, as a consultant, you have two things that you'll be. You'll either be first to market or you'll be what we call me too. So in my case, I was first to market with the training programs that were economically priced, but delivered by one of the kingpins of the process. And so I combined quality training with reasonably good pricing, and the rest was history. Well, it didn't take long for the Me Too people to realize that while they were only getting 20 people, they were charging $1,000 a piece. Well, pretty soon there weren't that many people willing to pay $1,000 a piece when they could come to Lee Lambert and get it for $200 or $300 or $400 a piece. So first to market, risky. You got to be sure that you know the marketplace well. Second of all, Me Too. So now, if you're a Me Too consultant and you look across the board, and I think I'd probably see this in Saudi Arabia if I took time to look, I'm going to see a lot of consultants, a lot of them offering the same basic services, and let's even say the same basic prices. So now we've got a situation where we've got a lot of consultants, same basic quality, same basic price. Now, what's the differentiator? If you're in that marketplace and you weren't first to market, you're Me Too, and you're in that marketplace, what's the differentiator for you that would determine whether you get the job or Abdullah gets the job next to you? What's the determination? It's your reputation. It's the relationships that you've developed. It's the trust that people have in you. So if over the years you've built up a high level of trust, now that puts you above the Me Too people because they're offering the same service, they're offering it at the same price, but now you've got a relationship developed with the customer that will differentiate you from the Me Too people. So you begin to see the complexities of entering into the environment of consulting. There's a lot to think about. There's a lot to build a reputation of. For example, when I come to Saudi Arabia, don't get me wrong, I came under invitation. I was invited to come and participate. But the fact of the matter is, one of the reasons I came is to build and strengthen the relationship. I'd never been to Saudi before. I'd worked in Kuwait, I'd worked in Bahrain, I'd worked in Abu Dhabi, I'd worked everywhere but Saudi. So one of the reasons that I was weaker in the idea of consulting for a Saudi customer was that nobody knew who I was. I mean, they might have known me for my reputation on the PMP, but nobody'd seen me in action. Nobody'd seen me teach. And so I needed an opportunity to do that. So I took that chance to come there for a very short period of time to see if I could build some relationship points. And I think I did that. I think I've had good feedback from the people that have been there. Y'all know Mona. I see Mona's on here. Mona was able to sit in and see my efforts. And pretty soon I start to see people say, gee, we'd really like to see you work with us more. So it works, but you have to invest your time. You see, I had to donate my time to get the opportunity to show that I deserve to be paid somewhere down the road. Maybe it's a year or 2 years from now. But building that reputation is critical to a consultant's role, because I've known really, really good consultants. In fact, I've worked with some of the best who have a hard time getting work because their strength is not relationship development. And anybody that's been a consultant very long knows that the development of relationship is half the battle when it comes to marketing. You got to be good at what you do too. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of people that are good at what they do that don't have the work that you do because they haven't developed the relationships over time. So those are the things that you've got to look at. Now, in 1982, 83, somewhere in that time frame, the market began to shift because the Me Too people recognized that to compete with me, they had to market their market costs significantly lower. And they found that it was harder to generate big profits. So all of a sudden, they began to impact my profits. But at the same time, they weren't recognizing the true effect, because now what I lost was spread over multiple consultants doing training. So they weren't reaping the direct benefit. I was reaping the direct impact in terms of loss of revenue. So now I had to start to look at what could I do to do a very large consulting job for a company called Behringer Mannheim Corporation. They were based out of Indiana. They did blood glucose monitoring, in-home use systems or medical diagnostics, and they had been losing market share at an incredibly fast rate because Johnson & Johnson had come up with a new product to compete with Behringer with a faster, better, more accurate product. And so they were forced with either folding up their tent or coming up with a piece of equipment that leapfrogged the leapfrog, Johnson & Johnson. Well, they started to try to expedite a new product development, but they had no idea what they were doing. And so eventually they called me in to do a consulting job. It was really to do an assessment to see where they were, what was left and needed to be done, and could they even create the system fast enough to avoid having to go bankrupt because of loss of revenue. And so I spent 2 weeks in there doing an assessment. The assessment said, I think it's doable. I think you can compete with Johnson & Johnson in a timely way, but I think you're going to have to implement a project management methodology that has no bells and whistles, just straight out, get it done as the fastest rate possible, but is still managed as if it were a very thorough and well thought out project. So eventually they said, okay, that makes sense. And they said, well, who should we have do that in-house? Well, I'd interviewed almost everybody in-house, and it was obvious to me there was nobody in-house that could do it. So I told them that. And they said, well, how about you come do it? And I said, well, I hadn't really thought about that. They were about a 4-hour drive from my home in Ohio. And this was going to be what they thought was going to be a 3-year hard driving project. So I said, well, I'm not sure I want to do that. And then they offered the money to me, and I said, okay, I'll do it. For that amount of money, I'll do it. And so I started working with them. And we were able to do some high-profile staff development, and we created a high-performance team that was made up of only about 205 people that were responsible for saving the company. Now, there were 2,000 employees on the site that had to maintain the old products for a while. And so these 200 people were charged with the responsibility of saving the company. Well, as a consultant, I basically said, I'm not doing work. I don't do work. I'll manage this project, and I'll manage it in a way that gets you the best product in the fastest time. But don't look for me to do work, as in don't look for me to create schedules and do statusing. I'll teach people how to do that and do it effectively, but I'm the manager. I'm the GM, essentially, for this little company that we'd formed. So that's the approach that we took. Now, we were working, I hate to say this now because I don't know if I'd ever do it again, but we were working on average 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for 18 months. So that's what we call a pretty crazy project. Now, as a result of that, we delivered that project not in 3 years, not in 3 years at all. We delivered that project in 18 months. And we delivered it to the marketplace and almost instantly began to regain huge pieces of market share because we delivered a product that was faster, better, cheaper, and more accurate than the Johnson & Johnson. And so many of the people that had left to go to Johnson & Johnson came back for the reason that the product was so much superior. Well, that was brought about by a consultant. Now, having that ticket punched, and that's what we talk about all the time in credibility, is you have that ticket punched. So now I've got project management knowledge because I got the PMP ticket punch. I got training knowledge because I've made millions of dollars as a trainer, got that ticket punched. And now I've got an organization that's very well thought of in the world today, have 72% market share. I've now created a save the product, save the organization project that gives me that ticket punch. So I got all the tickets punched. So now you see my role as a consultant. Now, granted, I'm 77 years old, so I don't have a whole lot of years left. But the fact of the matter is, I got all the tickets punched. I've been in an executive position. I've been a vice president of staff and organizational development. So I got that ticket punched. And so now there's not a responsibility. There's not a project type that I've not been well prepared for. So I think it's something that you have to pay attention to. It's not as easy as getting a business card that says you're a consultant. You have to back that up with a long record of historical accomplishments. Now, some of the exceptions to that are those of you, and I see there's quite a few on the call, those of you who have PhDs in your field of expertise. That PhD is worth a lot in terms of time, in terms of knowledge. So you may get to go a shorter route than I did. I mean, I started my working career in 1966, and I didn't go into a consulting business until 1984. So 18 years went by before I was able to make a reasonably wise jump into the field of consulting. A PhD or even a high-level master's degree will cut that time down significantly. It will not replace all the tickets that you have to have punched. It just won't. And so you're still going to have to do some work, if you will, to earn the punch tickets that give you the background that you can honestly say, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Don't say that if you don't feel like you can, because one bad job can spoil 5 potential jobs downstream. So you don't want to take on a job that you don't have a lot of confidence in, because if you fail, you can't get that off your record. And so you want to make sure that you don't take on jobs that won't lead to high probability of success. And I've had a couple of those early on in my career that I had to basically say, I'm not going to bid on it. I think I can win this bid, but I'm not sure I can actually deliver what the customer's looking for. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Sometimes it's smart to pass on a bid opportunity if you think it may be too risky. You've got to take a look at it from that point. And that's the other thing from a technical standpoint. You really have to become excellent risk managers, because when you undertake the role of consulting, you're going to expose yourself to massive amounts of risk. And you need to take a comprehensive look from a risk management perspective. And we have a credential, we have a certification for risk management that proves you know how to do that. That's a great certification to earn, to have that in your repertoire. So if I did that, and every time before I decide to pursue a bid opportunity, I'm going to go through a risk analysis for my reputation, for my business perspective. You can also backfill those things with partnerships. But now remember, when you enter into partnerships, you're splitting up the profits. You're going to be dividing the profits among the partners. Nothing wrong with that if they generate lots of revenue. But if you're a one-man show like I've been pretty much by decision most of my time, whatever profit I make is mine. And so I know that the harder I work, the more contracts I get, the more profit I make. And I don't have to divide that up with anybody. But some organizations have specialties, and they'll have a person that's their specialty, and that's the focus. And that's when we're bidding on a job that has that area of expertise required, that individual is put up as the lead person on that bid. So you've got to realize the differences between independent consultants and partnerships and the legal requirements. I know several of my friends have had bad experiences in partnerships where the partnership dissolved. They were left holding the bag, so to speak, for some debts, and it got sort of ugly. So just because you are good friends with a partner doesn't mean it will end well. So be careful if you decide to go into it from a partnership perspective. But I think what I found in Saudi is that the relationship development efforts there are much more pronounced than they are in the States. I think we don't spend enough time developing relationships in the States. But when I see the friendships and the relationships and the, gosh, I haven't seen you for ages, and the hugging and the attitudes of the relationships in Saudi, and in most of the Arab countries for that matter, but that strikes me as a very positive thing from a consultant. So now when I'm doing a job in Saudi and I need the help on a certain area, I don't have to be in partnership with them, but I can give them a call and say, hey, I got a piece of work here that I think you'd be perfect fit for. Do you want to take a look at it and join me for this particular activity? That's what I see happening in the future, is that we become an association rather than a partnership. We become a skill set associated, so that way I don't have to build up all these skill sets myself. I have an association of partnerships, meaning friends, that I can call on that can backfill into that part of the organization. Don't be afraid to share those kinds of contracts, because what happens is it becomes reciprocal. So now when your person you shared with a year down the line gets a huge contract and they don't have the skill set, guess who they call? They call you, because it's reciprocal. We take care of those that take care of us. And so we've got to be in that view or that state of mind. to be able to do that. Would I recommend consulting? Absolutely. Now, there are people that I've known that have not liked consulting. They like the stability of that paycheck every month, not having to wonder how much am I going to have this month, not having to wonder what benefits or advantages they have. They like that stability. But most consultants you'll find, even if they tried it and quit, most consultants you'll find are extremely confident in their skill set capabilities, extremely confident that they will make far more money than they ever made in a salaried position. And so they pursue it with vigor. They look for it. Now, so what I'm trying to say, now I'm going to wind up here in a minute and take some questions. What I'm trying to say is it's that first 10 to 12 years of preparation for taking that step into consulting that people aren't investing enough time in. They're not getting their tickets punched before they become consultants, and they end up paying a price for that. So again, once I've gotten to where I am now, I've gotten all the tickets punched. I'm just waiting around for a few jobs to roll in to keep me going till I, maybe I'll go till I'm 80. I don't know. That's not that long from now. Maybe I'll go till I'm 80. And then maybe I'll just help one of you guys out for once in a while if you need help. But that's my pitch for consulting. I believe in it. I'm sold on it under the circumstances that I've defined. Now, I want to take the last 10 minutes or so and open it up for any questions that you might have. I've tried to cover the things you should be thinking about, but if there are other questions, I'm open to answering those as well.
Yes, please. If anyone have any question, please raise their hands. Okay, Mr. Farouk.
Touch.
Unmute yourself, please.
Who's asking the questions? I got two Farouks. I hear it.
Mr. Farouk, can you unmute yourself? المايك عندك مش شغال بس لو تشغله.
I think you may have to do it.
Yeah. Okay, let's go with Nada until Mr. Farouk solves his problem. Mr. Nada.
Yes,
Ms.
hi,
Nada,
thank
sorry.
you. Don't worry. Thank you so much. Beautiful. Like, I really enjoyed your storytelling. Very inspiring. I'll quickly ask my question to give opportunity for others. So I was interested to learn about some of your resilience strategies to keep up your work, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's. I think that's an excellent question. I'll tell you what I did during the pandemic to maintain what I call resilience. And if you put that as the equation that it has to be a revenue generator, then that's probably not a good fit for what I'm going to tell you. Here's what I did. I could see what was happening. I could see that everything was going to be virtual. I was going to be locked away for. I never would have thought 2 years. But what I did was then I began to offer free 1-hour webinars on several different topics that were I'll use the term hot during that period of time. And during the pandemic, I did over 65 1-hour free webinars in 37 countries around the world. So you see, what I was doing was keeping my name in front of people, making them think I was a good guy because I was doing them free, giving them a chance to see how I taught the topics, and therefore hoping that would pay back in residuals of people coming back to me when the pandemic was over. And in fact, that's proven to be absolutely true. So that was a decision I made, that that was the only way I could see where I could maintain the resilience in the marketplace that was needed during a pandemic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Farouk, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, sir, for the good information you gave us. The question I have, between now what you are doing in project management generally, it comes under hard skills, an area where companies or clients are really looking for, because they can either save money or they can solve some real problem in their business. What would you advise for the soft skills? Because this is an area where most of people, even though they have a problem, they don't recognize. For example, talk about motivation, talk about performance management. Everybody knows they have a problem, yet they don't try to look for it because they cannot see it. It's soft skills. It's kind of questionable. So what would you advise?
You know, senior people like you and me, we see this all the time. We see organizations who, I mean, you can just walk in an organization and smell it. But when you offer an opportunity for them to improve that, they say, well, we can't afford that. We don't spend that much. So what I've done in the past, and I've run into this a lot, is that I will create a little case that compares the money they're losing compared to money that they will avoid losing if they were to do the right things. And it sort of wakes them up because they can't visualize the amount of money that they lose based on poor motivation, poor management techniques. And so you've got to find a way to convert it into what's in it for them. If you're only talking about what's in it for you, they don't care. But if you can quantify that in a term of what's in it for them and their organization, suddenly they will begin to see the light. But I've not seen a massive change. I think they're still of the mindset that we'll get by and we're not going to spend $1 million changing systems when we could get by without it. Well, they don't quantify the intangible cost of $2 million that they lose by not having that capability. So I think you're in a tough situation. I think it's highly dependent upon management's reality and their ability to understand and accept that the world's moving on. And you can either continue to manage the same old way you have for years, or you can improve your management concepts and become more profitable and bigger market share.
Thank you. Now we will take a question from Mr. Ahmed Hammam. Mr. Ahmed?
Yes, thank you for this really fruitful and great knowledge. I heard, of course, you're talking about the power of networking and building the network for consultancy. You repeated that, I think you made a huge emphasis on it. Any special tricks for building the network? Because when to start building the network, how long I need to say that I have a mature networking for kicking off or initiating consultancy work?
Yeah, I think if I use mine as a reference, mine's probably a little earlier than most because I knew what I was going to do. But I started after about 3 years. I started building that network. One of the ways you build it is based on the work that you do. To whomever you work with, begin to build a network of relationships for them. Begin to, if you're a member of the Saudi project management chapter, make sure you go to meetings, make sure you do things for the chapter, get yourself exposed so people begin to see Fahad, oh yeah, I remember he was at the meeting last week. Yeah, and so you need to begin to get your name recognized with a skill. And once you begin to do that, then it starts to broaden and you've built your network. Let me tell you, for example, when I quit the corporate world in 1984, I quit on a Friday I called one of my network, a company called Decision Planning Corporation in California. I called them. I had worked with them in 1968. I called them up and said, I'm leaving corporate. I'm available to do consulting. That Monday, I started a new job on the Niagara Mohawk nuclear power reactor. That consultant relationship was established almost 10 years prior. And so you have to start to realize the network that you're building now may not be useful to you for 6, 8, 10 years down the road. So you've got to have a pretty big network to do that. But you've got to be in a position where you're recognized and people understand that it's you. I don't know what the membership is in the KSA chapter, but the fact of the matter is when you hold that forum that we held this recently, you look at all the people that was in that forum. If you could have all those people as a network contact, you'd probably have enough to last you for a long time. And so you've got to build that network, and you got to start right away. You may not use it. You may not have availability to use it for a while. But when I was networking at General Electric, nobody said I couldn't do that. Nobody said I couldn't maintain a listing of people that I ran into during my work. And so I don't think there's a problem with that. If you take work away from your customer, obviously, or away from your organization, but if you just keep it as a record, for when you need it, I don't see any problem with that.
Thank you. We will take now 2 questions. One from Mr. Fahad. So, Mr. Fahad, go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Lee. It was a pleasure to meeting you in Riyadh last month. I have a quick question regarding the new trends of agility. Now, it's talking about agile, project management, and innovation, and everything around the agility and the new trend in project management. I just need to know your opinion about the trends for the project management, especially in the agile area, and how would it how is the potential that you see for consultation in that area?
I see for consultant in it depends on what your field is. Now, if you're in software development, anything of that nature, you've got to become very good at Agile. There's no question about that. Agile's here to stay. It ain't going away for a while anyway. And even though I've been seen as a dissenter about Agile, I'm not really. I just think that we try to think that it can be applied in every particular project. This is not true. But I do think Agile has some very real benefits. In fact, even compared to what Farouk was saying, with Agile approach, you're going to see you've got a problem much sooner than you would in a traditional approach. And so I think it has some value, but software development is where you're going to see that. And I think that today's consultant, and I'm glad I'm not starting fresh, I'll tell you that, today's consultant, your knowledge base is going to have to be broader, because you're going to have to understand and be able to utilize traditional project management techniques, as well as be versed in Agile applications as well. So I think it requires a lot more knowledge than it did when I started.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my last question, this is my question. So how corporate and organization culture affect project management success? And please, after answering this question, if you could give us some recommendation to the people who attend this webinar about the consulting businesses to close with this webinar. Thank you very much.
Well, I think, there's a lot of work being focused on cultural now. And I think if I just think of Saudi as an example, if I came to Saudi Arabia and tried to manage projects like I managed that one that was a miracle project, it wouldn't go. It wouldn't go because the culture's different here. The attitudes are different here. But I think I see more and more recognition of the importance of motivation and stimulation and delegation in Saudi than I've remembered I'd seen in Kuwait for sure. And so I think it's going to happen I don't think you're going to be able to keep it out, but you're still it's going to take a long time. I mean, remember, it's taken however many years to get where you are now. If I start to look at any major change in culture, you're talking about a long-term implementation.
Thank you. If you could give us some.
Yeah, I think with what I hear is going on in terms of projects and the expenditures of money, and of course it's blown way out of proportion here in the U.S. I mean, they make the biggest deal out of everything, but the opportunities that lie ahead in consulting are extremely high, because there's not enough companies to do all the things that are being done in Saudi Arabia in the next 5 to 10 years. There's just not. And so you're going to see, if you don't do it in-house, you're going to see an influx of expat consultants. And I don't know that you want to do that. I mean, you may need some for expertise, but the fact of the matter is, why not let in-house people, why not let Saudi people take up those consulting roles and backfill some of the other positions with expats, people that don't have to be quite as highly skilled. I'm telling you, if I were a younger man, which I'm not, I'd be making a move to Saudi pretty quick.
Thank you very much.
Join me. I'm glad that I could help even one person. So if anybody has questions, certainly get a hold of me. But for now, I hope that we added some value.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the week, people. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone attending.